First, I want to thank Bryden Ross for putting this together and getting us organized and keeping us moving forward. As I looked through the agenda here at the CSG meetings, I got to tell you, I had a little nostalgia for when I signed up for classes the first time at the University of Wisconsin, when you did these things by paper and you sat down with your advisor. At the University of Wisconsin, we had breadth and depth requirements of things you had to do when you were in school in your 4 years of college. And I feel like the CSG meeting here has the breadth and depth requirements. You have a real good educational opportunity here. And I hope I learn a lot today as well. So very exciting opportunities for you guys. We're about to throw a ton at you, and this is an industry that is an exercise in acronyms. And at the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, or MISO, we have a rule that is if we use an acronym and it goes unexplained, we have to make a donation to the Make-A-Wish Foundation. So you guys are the acronym police today. That's right. If I make a reference to an acronym and it goes undiscussed, you got to come up and let me know, and I'll have to make that donation. So we'll start off our discussion of reliability with a depiction of what the United States looked like on August 14th, 2003. Show of hands really quick. Does everybody remember where they were on that day? All right. All right. Probably a pretty heavy East Coast bias. If you were in LA, you might not have experienced this the way others did. But I was in the Newark, New Jersey airport that day, and so I have a very fond remembrance of that, although fond might not be the right term for the chaos that did ensue there for a little while. But we'll get back to this a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about what happened on that day, and we'll talk about what's happened since. First, let's get a real quick overview about what we're talking about with the bulk electric system. In the upper left-hand corner, you'll see generation resources. It could be any type of resource. I've heard a lot of discussion already this morning of even resources that aren't depicted in that, but it could be nuclear, it could be gas, could be wind, could be fossil fuels as well. And then it goes onto the transmission grid and then steps down in voltage to distribution and then goes to customers, industrial, residential, or commercial. And the customers we'll probably refer to, I always refer to that as load. So if you hear me say this is the load on the system, that's what I'm referring to as end-use customers. The pretty amazing thing about this system is that at every moment, generation on the system and the load on the system has to be matched up. There isn't any storage of electricity, and so generators and load are matched up simultaneously at all times, and that's where MISO comes into play of making sure that gets matched up, at least in the territory that we serve. Members of ours turn over their functional control so that we actually control the transmission system. So where is MISO and what is MISO? Or I've already explained it as the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator, so I don't feel like that's a Make-A-Wish Foundation contribution right there. But MISO is organized, we're a membership organization. It's voluntary membership of utilities and transmission owning entities in the area in the green that you see here on the left. We're a non-stock, not-for-profit 501c4 operated exclusively for the promotion of social welfare and governed by an independent board. We're based in Carmel, Indiana. We have offices in St. Paul, Minnesota, and there's a control center there as well. That's moving to Eagan, Minnesota very soon, and then soon we will be having a control center in Little Rock, Arkansas. It's a very large geographic area and very diverse. We're expanding into 4 new states in December of this year. That's the South region. And we serve about 65,000 miles of transmission. That's about just under 50 million people are served. And adding the South region actually adds some challenges. As we heard earlier today, one of the big reliability issues can be storms, and there's still recovery going on in the Northeast from Hurricane Sandy. Well, we've never really had to deal with, if you look at the map on the left, there's sort of a light green that is more of the Midwest from Michigan out to Montana, and then a dark green that is the South region. Well, there aren't a lot of hurricanes that come into the light green area, but there are a lot of hurricanes that come into the dark green area. So this is a new challenge for us that we haven't had to really deal with before, though there is inclement weather and different types of weather in the traditional footprint as well. It also brings new benefits that the South region actually is much more natural gas heavy in its generation, and traditionally in the upper Midwest, we've been very coal dependent. So that goes to a lot of the discussion you guys have had today about fuel diversity. MISO is not the only RTO in the United States. In fact, in North America, there are several RTOs. I did point out that Manitoba technically is a part of the Midwest ISO. We have an interchange agreement with them, but because the Midwest ISO or Mid-Continent ISO is governed by FERC, the Manitoba cannot actually be brought under FERC jurisdiction because it's a Canadian province. So it's a little bit different of an arrangement. We have an interchange between the two, but we effectively use the resources in Manitoba for the Mid-Continent system. But about 2/3 of the U.S. population is covered by RTOs, 50% of the Canadian population. And while there are some differences among them in their market structures, there are some key similarities in their characteristics in that they are independent. RTOs do not own the transmission that they operate or the generators that they tell how to move on the system. We operate those, and utilities like AEP actually own those facilities. There's a scope and size to them. There's operational authority that we will operate the transmission system, and we have reliability responsibility that Janet's going to talk a lot about through the NERC requirements. When I say scope and size, one thing that's important to remember is we used to operate this system. I think of it as sort of like bubbles, that if I were the utility serving Kansas City, I would have a generator and I'd have my load and I'd match those two things up. And on any given day, I'd say, well, I'm going to run my generator. I'm going to serve my load. If I need a little extra, I'll use the transmission system to buy some from my neighbor. I might give him a call and say, hey, I need to buy some additional energy. Or if I have some extra, I might call my neighbor and try and sell that. The benefits of RTOs is that we're looking at very, very diverse geographic areas and saying, let's match up the best generation with the load that's going to be on that system and use the transmission system to deliver that. So that's a big change that's occurred fairly recently. This is the history of MISO, and as you can see, it's a pretty short history. 2001, we got approval by FERC to be the first RTO in the United States, and here we are just in 2013. So it's not a very long history of RTOs in the United States, though there were power pools and things like that prior to that, but RTOs are a relatively new phenomenon. Who oversees MISO? The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. You'll notice I said the entire words before I used the acronym, so that's no contribution there. Is our main regulator. When we want to change our tariff or make any changes to our market structures, we go to FERC. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation is the reliability standards maker, or NERC. And so they kind of tell us what the reliability standards are going to be, and that's what we live up to. And now that I say that, I got to say, I can't disparage NERC to say that, like, Janet's sitting around in her office thinking about, oh, this is what I'm going to tell MISO to do tomorrow. These are very open and transparent processes to develop the reliability standards. In fact, we participate very heavily in those processes. And I should also say that MISO has very open and transparent stakeholder processes for our market structures. We host about 800 meetings per year, so if you ever are in Carmel, Indiana and looking for something to do, we'll gladly invite you over there. But I think we single-handedly keep the catering business in that town in business, so it's a very stakeholder-intensive process. We also have other regional entities, and I realize I've got to make 3 contributions to the Make-A-Wish Foundation because I use MRO, RFC, and CERC in this. And those are, and I think Janet will get into that a little bit more. We do have sub-regional entities that actually look into reliability standards as well, and then the North American Energy Standards Board, which their standards get put into our tariffs through FERC proceedings. So what is MISO's mission? It's to create value, and we do that in sort of 3 buckets. With reliability, we keep the lights on through the Midwest. The analogy that we like to use is that we're sort of the air traffic controller for the grid in the Midwest, and we'll get into a little bit more on the next slide what that means. We also have 3 markets, 3 primary markets that we run. One is a resource adequacy market. So in a year in advance, we look at how much load we think is going to be on the system, and then we say how much generation needs to be on the system, and we add a little bit on top of that because machines break and things go out of service. So we have a sort of contingency reserve amount that is required for people to have extra generation on the system to serve load when it's the hottest day of the year typically. We also have a day ahead market. So as we sort of funnel this down into more proximate time, day ahead is everybody sends in their load forecast to MISO for tomorrow, today. So today they will send it in for tomorrow. And we will then try and match up all that load with the right generation. So generators will bid in at their theoretically marginal cost, and then we will try and match up all the load that needs to be met on the system with the cheapest generators that can actually serve that system. And so this requires a lot of modeling to make sure that the generators are going to be actually able to serve that load. But every day we're essentially running a commodities market for energy. And then there's a real-time market as well. So everything that didn't get caught in that day ahead market because some forecasts are inaccurate, or not, I shouldn't say inaccurate, but we're always having a hard time forecasting precisely how much load is going to be on the system. And so because that has to match up exactly, we have a real-time market that's making up any difference between what the day ahead market cleared and what's going on in the real time. Finally, at the bottom here, we do regional transmission planning. So that's actually looking out even further. So we'll look at different futures and try and identify what transmission system is going to be needed in the long term. It's very difficult, obviously, to build transmission. I think if anybody's from a state that's had transmission lines built recently, you know that that can be a very, very difficult process and time-consuming. So we have to look out very far into the future and say, this is the type of transmission that we think needs to be built to meet our long-term needs. So from a reliability standpoint, what happens every day? What are we doing to monitor the grid? And its visibility, we monitor the electric grid 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, 366 on leap years. And the way MISO's set up, and this is sort of a funny anecdote, but the way MISO's set up, we have two buildings. One hosts our control center, and that's a much more secure building to get into. And then there's a building on the other side of the street that hosts sort of our administrative area where all the stakeholder meetings are and executive offices, et cetera. And there's a glass tube that goes between the two. It's an HVAC guy's nightmare because it's always hot in there when it's sunny. But I think of it sort of like a little gerbil tube. You can see people kind of going back and forth between the two. And on Labor Day weekend this year, as I was packing up my car to go off and have a great fun weekend with my family and friends, I was putting my stuff in the trunk and I look over and I see a bunch of folks walking through the gerbil tube on their way to their shift in the control area, and I realized, wow, I'm gonna have to go have fun, and they're gonna go make sure that the lights stay on for the weekend. So, but I will assure you that they look like pretty happy gerbils on their way in there. So what do the gerbils do when they get into that building? They monitor over 300,000 data points that we're collecting information on every 5 seconds. So that's making sure that voltage is stable, that the frequency of the system is in check. And then they also model about 8,300 contingencies, and a contingency is like a fault on the system. If a transmission line were to break or a generator were to go out of service, we look at that 8,300 possible faults in the system every 4 minutes to see what happens. Those are the kinds of algorithms and models that I think Nate Silver would maybe even faint if he saw the computing power that's being used for this. And then we use well-documented procedures to respond to issues. Those are a lot of NERC requirements that Janet's going to get into, and we coordinate with our neighbors. So this is what that looks like on a daily basis. These are some pictures of our control room. So these are the happy gerbils, I guess. And if anybody ever makes their way to Carmel, Indiana, or Eagan, Minnesota, feel free to give us a buzz, and we can, with the proper clearances to make sure that we meet our NERC requirements, you can get in and actually take a tour of the facilities. And if you really like LED lights, you would be really into a tour there. So you guys are a state organization and work with your states, and so I did want to take an opportunity to talk about how much we work with our states. Although we are regulated largely from a federal government standpoint, we work very closely with our state organizations and our state commissioners largely. So if you know your state commissioners in your states, those are the folks that we work with a lot. And I want to give an example of how we are working with our states right now to address a lot of the issues you guys were talking about earlier today. As we were looking at our models looking forward and saw one of the main issues that we're modeling right now is what are the impacts of the EPA rules that are coming out. And we are very coal heavy, as I said earlier, particularly in our Midwestern area. We are very coal heavy states. And so as we were looking at the future, we're looking and saying, wow, we have a lot of load that's going to maintain on the system and a lot of generators that are likely going to retire due to the EPA rules. And in fact, some of them due to just pure economic factors going on with gas prices getting lower and lower. We had some pretty big concerns about whether or not we were going to have enough capacity on the system in the long term. And our one-year construct for resource adequacy wasn't giving us entirely enough forward view. So we went and talked to our state regulators because they are the ones that are ultimately responsible for resource adequacy under the Federal Power Act, and said, what can we do to sort of get some more visibility into this system? And so we developed a survey with our regulators in the OMS, the Organization of MISO States, which lends itself to a troubling Make-A-Wish Foundation situation because it's actually an acronym with an acronym embedded in it. So that's perfect for this industry, I think. Wow, tough crowd out here, huh? I figured that would get a lot of laughs. Maybe that says more about me than it says about you guys. Anyway, we developed a survey that actually is looking for a lot more information from our load serving entities and our utilities to say, not only do we want to know what your load forecasts are going to be, but we want some certainty factors around that. And we typically use our generation queue, people that come to us and say, I want to interconnect into your system as what resources are going to be available to us in the future. This asks for, are you planning other generation facilities that we aren't aware of at this point? So we're getting a lot more in-depth information, and we're going to start plugging that into some of our models. This is sort of hot off the presses. The survey itself was due yesterday, and so we're just starting to go through some of the responses that we've received. But this is an example of working very, very closely with our state regulators to make sure that issues like resource adequacy are addressed and we don't have major problems as we head into the time frame when EPA rules are going to come into play. So getting back to August 14th, 2003, my question here is, do you remember what you had in your pocket that day? I saw a lot of show of hands, a lot of people that remember where they were, but do you remember what you had in your pocket that day? And the reason I remember what I had in my pocket, I was in the Newark airport. I was coming back from an extended time in Italy, and if there's a question and answer session and anybody wants to ask about that, I could talk about that all day. But what I had in my pocket was my passport and a rudimentary Italian cell phone, that, you know, the type that you'd have to like hit 75 keys to send a 2-word text message to anybody. And the reason I think that that's interesting now is that here we sit in 2013, and I'm guessing, I mean, I have something in my pocket now that pretty much obviates the need for me to have any social interaction with anybody ever again. And technology has changed so dramatically in that time, just of what we have in our pockets, but that's true of the grid as well, in some respects. Some of this is just structural changes that have occurred since 2003, that we've gone to the RTO model. We've had markets that have come on that are sending us market signals rather than just taking load off the system when there are problems. And we're getting a lot more information. Again, we used to only look at 300 key facilities in 2003. Now we're monitoring 300,000 data points and doing a lot of contingency modeling as well. And just the change in technology and computing power has allowed that to occur. So we have a lot more tools. We have a lot more training. A lot of that is required by NERC. Our operators, our happy gerbils, are doing simulator training very frequently, doing work with the industry to make sure that we're keeping up with all the reliability concerns that are out there. And to keep the alliteration going, tools, training, and trees, one thing that has also changed is that we have pretty robust vegetation management policies within our utilities. Some may recall that in 2003, one of the many events that occurred that day was some vegetation got too close to a transmission line and tripped that line out of service, and then that sort of started the cascade. And now we have a lot better vegetation management as well. The latest technology, the last thing I wanted to sort of impress upon you is that that technology that has occurred in our cell phones is also occurring on the grid pretty dramatically right now as well. MISO has installed several synchro phasers onto our system, partially due to a grant from the Department of Energy. And we also have a member, American Transmission Company, that's installed some of these synchrophasers as well. Really, this is a measurement device that allows us to have a lot more vision into the machine than ever before. How we're actually employing this is we're now trying to get this into our modeling processes and into the work that we do for reliability every day. But the key facts here are the last 2 points, is that under the old system, those 300,000 data points would send us about 1 report every 2 to 4 seconds. A synchrophaser is sending us about 10 reports per second. And I'll give credit to Terry Boston, who is the CEO of, the Chief Executive Officer of the PJM interconnection. And now that's probably going to require a contribution to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, because I think it's Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland interconnection. All right, saved myself there. He's the CEO of that RTO, and he said, going to synchrophasers is like doctors going from x-rays to MRIs, that you have so much more information and you can see you can diagnose the problems that are occurring on the grid well before they become problems like we saw in 2003. So I will just say a couple real quick other things that as we get more technology onto the grid, that obviously leads to more challenges as well. Cybersecurity is a massive concern as you're using more and more technology and using more and more computing power. If those things get compromised, then the thing that you're relying on is really troubling. The other issue is integrating new resources like distributed generation or demand response. I know these are big issues for a lot of you guys, and you're hearing a lot about those things. I'll just say the example or the experience we've had in the Midwest is we've integrated a lot of variable resources, mainly wind resources, onto our system in the last 10 years. I think we went from less than 1,000 megawatts to about 13,000 megawatts of wind power, which seemed to be a big challenge at the time because wind obviously blows sometimes, it doesn't other times. It's not as steady. It's not like a fossil generator that you can just put fuel into and get different outputs from. You have to sort of manage that a lot more. But we've been very successful in doing that, and I think that to me tells me that we have the ability to integrate new things like new technologies like demand response and distributed generation onto our system. So